Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, President and Founder of AgileDad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a topic that has come up a number of times in my courses from a number of different people who are all asking the same question. They're like, Agile is a great thing. Agile is a great tool. Forecasting, estimating, all those things, we got them down. But the one thing that we seem to struggle the most with is getting people to buy in when it comes to the Agile budgeting framework or the Agile budgeting process. They say that, there has to be something that I can throw at these people to help people understand that there's a different way to finance or budget for an Agile project than there is for a non-Agile project. And that is true. So there was a study that was done by PricewaterhouseCoopers that estimates about 28% of Agile projects are more successful than traditional ones, which sounds awful on the surface, but it actually is a good number if you think of it as, nearly a third is better just because they're Agile. But I think the difference between a successful Agile project and a not successful Agile project could lie in the way that you're setting up your budget, because that could be the difference in your organization to be able to stay ahead of the competition and understand how to do things in an ever-changing world. So I think the question is, the overarching question is, what is Agile budgeting? How does that work? And I think that sometimes people think in a most traditional sense, and they think that instead of financing an entire project, I'm just going to break the money into multiple sections, and then I'm going to allocate money for each of those sections as we go. So maybe in requirements gathering, creating estimates, mapping out the project at once, getting it all done, and then breaking it into chunks and doing the budgeting that way, per quarter, per number of sprints, however you plan on doing it. However, people over time recognize inefficiencies in trying to set up that system and budget that way and trying to fund projects that way. It just didn't make sense, especially when a growing number of contracts that people were signing were time and materials or were very strictly enforced, and they lacked flexibility with how projects were being funded. So the question became, how do we fund projects and keep them flexible, but at the same time, maintain agility, but still deliver things of value? And I get it. That makes more sense. And it brings to mind the question about Agile earned value, for example. So one of the things that I try to do is when I go into an organization, I try to establish with them a strategy that we can do to accurately forecast a project. Now, the truth is, most organizations already know what they want to spend on a project. They already know how much money they want to put into it, right? And if they know that, the question then is, based on this budget and based on the teams that are available to work on it and based on the number of sprints that they're available and the number of story points those teams can do collectively, what items or what features can I expect to be delivered within that time frame? So I think that when we break our budget down, we need to break our budget down into 4 distinct categories. The first category is initiation or ideation. This is where we're coming up with a project and saying, hey, let's talk about this and make sure it's a good idea. It's something that's in line with what we're trying to do strategically. It makes sense for the organization and it provides some value both to the organization and to the key stakeholders, right? So that's the first step. And you want to make sure you set a small amount of money aside for that. The second phase, if you will, has to do with creating an MVP, a minimal viable product. It's also called discovery. So if you're not doing a software project, it's okay. It's discovery about, will this meet the needs of your audience? So you're going through and you're creating an MVP, and that could be a prototype. It could be something that's quick and dirty. It's just a way for us to prove that this is a viable option, that it's going to work with our current systems, that it's going to make sense, and that people are going to utilize what we're trying to build, right? So this is the MVP stage. It's a little more expensive than the visioning stage, but it's not quite as expensive as the build out stage, right? So it's right there in the middle. And what I find is that when organizations set aside a little larger portion for that, that's usually when they can discover. And by the way, this is the point where it's a good idea to remember that you can cut the tail at the end. If you discover that, yeah, it's a great idea, but it's just not feasible, or it's a great idea, but it's going to be way too expensive. This gives you the ability to say, you know what, let's cut our losses here and move on without having invested a whole lot into the product or project. The honest truth is, a lot of people think that Agile budgeting or Agile financing means that we are going to finance the entire project all the way through, and that we're going to start by financing the items that are in sprint 1, and that we're going to finance everything together, and that the team's going to build while we're doing discovery about the next items. And what winds up happening is you get into this mode where you're in build mode, or delivery mode, as I like to call it, where you're delivering all the features and the things that people are asking for, and you're in this straight up build mode where you just build. And what ends up happening is you end up lacking all the discovery and lacking all of the ideation. And you end up building something A, that the customers don't need, or B, you end up over engineering or under engineering, and just not building the right things. There was never any research done. We're doing it all based on what a product owner's perceived needs are of the end consumer. So I think it's important that we align our strategy for financing and budgeting around something that's more realistic as opposed to something that's more ethereal, right? And I think that sometimes we fail to do that, and that's where we run into trouble. So the third phase of funding, which is the most expensive phase, that's build out. And that's where you can say, with the remaining budget for this project, we only have this much time. This is what we can expect to be delivered. And this is where I kind of put together what I call a red light, green light chart, where I say, based on that budget, based on the stories you're asking for, the feature level stories you're asking for, and the things that, you have the budget you have here, and the teams that have availability, my prediction is you're going to get all of these, some of these, and none of these. And if you can do that, and it should have been all of these, right? You get the point. But the point is, you can show people you're going to get these, you're not going to get these. And I think that when you can draw a line like that, and you can have a certain cone of uncertainty, it gives people the ability to really see what you can do and how you can do things. And it forces things towards a preference for a shorter timetable. So it gets people convinced that you're doing things in weeks instead of months or years, right? And I think that if you can get to that point, it's going to help a lot of people understand that agile budgeting is quite essential to being successful. The fourth phase of budgeting is release budgeting, and that's how we're going to get this final product out to our end consumer. If it's a technology product, especially, we need to worry about those kind of things. If it's a non-technology product, it's still something that we should consider, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the main focus of what we're trying to do, right? So I think that you need to, focus on, have the product owner focus on organizing the work in such a way the team can easily consume it. Have the teams focus on swarming to get the work done and limiting work in progress so that we know what we're focused on and get that sustainable development done. And then have the rest of the crew focus on releasing it and getting it out to our end consumers in a way that makes it easily consumable and highly satisfying to the end customer, right? And I think that if you do this, it will be more in line with the percentage of companies who have embraced Agile. So looking at organizations, that same study from PwC said that about 71% of enterprise-sized organizations have incorporated Agile approaches in at least some of their projects. I think that number's a touch low, but I'll go with it. If 71% of the organizations have incorporated Agile, that means that we should have a much higher degree of success than just 28%, right? So what I'm trying to say is we need to set ourselves up to be able to more quickly make decisions so that we can look at things and say, yeah, this is going to work, or no, this isn't going to work. But we need to be able to decide fast. We need to inspect, adapt, move on, right? We need to have transparency so we can make faster decisions. And we need to make sure CFOs and key decision makers and sponsors understand that when they're financing a project, that they're financing the smaller portion up front with a larger portion towards the end, and then with a smaller portion after. And once we teach them this desired four-phase approach, it makes it a lot easier for us to get these projects along. But that does require some organizational cooperation as well. We need to make sure that the budgetary constraints match with our legal constraints and our marketing constraints and our training constraints. So that it's not just one little piece you have to worry about. You have to make sure that you keep everyone in a loop in order to accomplish your budgetary goals. Because I think sometimes we don't take into consideration things that happen across various departments, and we end up getting ourselves into a pickle. Finally, there's operational alignment. So sometimes you need to have alignment across different groups in the organization, across different things that are happening. And you need to make sure, even if you're not delivering something software related, a system, if you will, or something that's totally not software related, you need to still have operational alignment so you can eliminate dependencies and gain focus on what you're trying to do and really, dive in on that whip and make sure you're doing things. The key to doing this successfully is to have three things. There's three things you need to do in order to make sure this is all successful. The first one is, once you get your budgeting in place, you need to keep it simple. You need to say, this percentage of our budget goes here, this percent goes here, this percent goes here. The truth is, traditional CFOs and traditional people who are funding projects, they don't necessarily understand how Agile projects should be funded. So they're funding them incorrectly and complaining because they don't feel like they're getting the earned value based on the investment that they put in. If they realize that they could do a smaller investment up front, they would feel like they're getting a consistent investment all the way through, or consistent return on investment all the way through. even in terms of ideation and the workspace set aside for MVP, right? The second is we need to make sure we have integrity in what we're building. So whether it's data integrity or making sure that we have good solid numbers or whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that the financial reporting that we're doing is sound, but we also want to make sure that we have integrity in what we're building, that we're taking the time to do it right, that our data needs to be solid, and we need to be able to make sure that what we're delivering is what we say. And we need to have some element of flexibility, right? We need to make sure we're flexible about how we're doing it. We need to make sure it's clear that this year's budget isn't going to affect the remaining budget for next year or whatever the case may be. We need to make sure we're easily fitting things inside of schedules and defining what's going to drive success. And I think if we do these things, that it's going to help us achieve a level of efficiency that we haven't seen in the past. That you're going to see things being more efficient, and you're going to get people who are more refined when it comes to agile budgeting, and it's going to make it easier for them to see how to lay out the money, right? And even though we've had so much uncertainty between COVID and other things that are going on, the one thing that stayed consistent for me is in the teams where we've taught this agile budgeting process, this agile budgeting framework, they've had greater success and have continued to deliver high quality and high value products and services. Where in organizations where we haven't had a chance to talk about these things, they're still struggling with determining the value earned over time versus the budget spent. And, you're trying to use metrics like story points, for example, to figure that out, which is a waste of time because it doesn't work. You need to be able to determine, the value you've received, and that's customer value, business value, and even technical value, because if it prevents you from having to, or if it adds value to something so that you don't have to do another major upgrade later, you need to account for those things, right? And I think that too often we don't understand how to define value. So we're not measuring the right level of value in an agile earned value equation against the money that we spent or the time that we spent. And it's causing confusion. So I guess my big tip for today is to focus, find a person who's responsible for financing and make sure that they have some agile training and that they're aware of those 4 funding phases, and that they realize that the first phase is minimal, the second phase is a little more, the third phase is where the bucket is, and then the last phase is another small phase to get the thing out the door. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you learned a lot. As always, we encourage you to visit agiledad.com where you can learn more about this topic and other topics. And if you have a topic you want us to cover in the Agile Dad podcast, don't be afraid. Send us an email. Learn more at agiledad.com, where we'd love to hear from you and hear your topic. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.